Hello, our listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Cultural Collision 北腔南调. I'm Victoria.
I'm EJ.
Today, we have incredible Andrea with us. Her journey has taken her from the hallowed halls of Deerfield to study English literature and art at Georgetown.
Post-graduation, she ventured into counseling students for U.S. college applications, and now she's steering a brand in the alcohol industry, Chateau Chanson. Let's delve into her unique world shaped by English literature. Welcome, Andrea. Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I was born and raised in Shanghai, and I moved to the States when I was a sophomore in high school. And I stayed in the US for 7 years before I came back to Shanghai to do education consulting. And now I have a wine brand called Chateau Chanson, and that's what I'm doing now.
So your education journey spans from boarding school, like you mentioned, you spent 7 years in the US, and then you went to Georgetown, focusing on English literature and art. How did these experiences shape your worldview and influence your later career choices?
I mean, I think it's a very big question, right? And I think it's not just how learning English literature shaped my life afterwards. It's a lot to do with my experience as a foreign student in the States, as someone who was not a native speaker, who was trying to learn English literature, and everything that comes together to form, who I am today. So something that I first feel like I had a strong, like the first impression that I had was how English literature changed the way I think about language and life. Because obviously when I went to the States, my English was pretty good, but I was never immersed in an English speaking environment before. And I always thought that the most difficult part would be like talking daily to English speakers. But it was after when I went to Deerfield when I realized that was not the problem at all. It was mostly a cultural thing, and I was just afraid to say anything because I realized everything I understood was a little bit different from how like the American students understand things. Like I would be in the dorm room and they would talk about like the cartoons that they watched as kids, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And they were all laughing, and I just felt so awkward because I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. So that was when I realized language was a lot more than just a tool for communication. But still, I was really interested in reading as a kid. And before even entering Deerfield, we had the summer reading list, and I we had to pick one from like a list of titles, and I picked Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which somehow just attracted my attention. And I think that was the first piece of literature that I read very carefully in a very critical way. And I think that was something that changed how I view literature and how I viewed storytelling and what it feels like to be different in an environment like a foreign environment. So yeah, that was a lot of random stuff that was not answering the question. But let me try to pull back to what the question was asking. I think English literature also formed what I viewed reality in a fictional way. I don't know if that makes sense, because I read a lot of novels, so it's just like writers creating worlds and realities in their own way. It's definitely based on reality, but a lot of things they're free to change the details about. And I was just starting to view my entire life as a work of fiction where I can, write like what me as a character represent, like what what I'm doing, what my characteristics are, and also being in a foreign environment, speaking a foreign language makes me think myself as an avatar sometimes, because when I talk to people in English, I sometimes feel like I'm just performing this character and I'm not actually me. Because there's this distance between, speaking your mother tongue and speaking a foreign language, where when you speak your mother tongue, you just feel like everything's coming from my heart. While when you're speaking a foreign language, it's like I'm just saying what's appropriate or what I should say in that context. So a large part of when I was living in the US, I just feel like I developed this new character to, face the everyday conversations, um, and even like a new personality kind of, because I'm a very introverted person, but in the States, I have to be this very chirpy and like very outgoing kind of person so that I'm, you know, liked among the very mean boarding school, high school kids. Um, so I guess just like learning English literature just made me think of things in a more critical way. I think that other kids might not be thinking in such a complicated way about their environment. Yeah.
Mm.
What Andrea shared makes me also like curious about EJ, because you used to live in Beijing for almost a decade. And what Andrea shared, do you feel like similar, or is it like resonates with you when you were in China?
Absolutely. I think particularly the part about the creating this character, this sort of like yeah, this like persona. I definitely think when I have to speak in Chinese, I think immediately people see me as like really shy and reserved and like kind of cute and quiet. And I think it's mostly because I'm thinking, like I really sometimes, depending on the context I'm in, I have to be really paying attention. Because to your same point, my friends will make literary references or cultural references. In Chinese, there's so much wordplay. And like if you miss one word, the joke is gone. I'm completely disconnected. And so yeah, I there definitely is sort of that oscillating between the English version of myself versus the Mandarin version of myself, or whatever language it is that I'm speaking at the time. I find that to be quite fascinating.
Yeah, and like I read this piece by a also a Chinese. Um, I think she moved to either States or the UK when she was like 28, so like pretty late. But she never wrote anything in Chinese, and she's a pretty well-known writer in English now. So one piece that she wrote, she's called Yiyun Li, and a piece called "To Speak Is to Blunder," where she talked a lot about private and public language, because for her, the private language should be Chinese, right? Um, the 28 years of her life, she experienced it in Chinese, but after that, she moved to an English-speaking country, and English becomes her public language. And for her, to write and to speak in a language that's not her mother tongue feels like a betrayal almost. Like she had to abandon her original language and everything that it represents, kind of. What she was like talking about between private and public language was like resonated a lot with me, because I think ever since I went to the States, I always had Chinese as a private language for me, and it provides a sense of comfort. When I talk to like other Chinese students, I just feel like, oh, finally I can like bitch about things or like say what's really on my mind. And even among the Chinese students, because I also speak the Shanghai dialect, so if I have like a Shanghai, a classmate from Shanghai, I can speak Chinese to him, and also like provides a sense of comfort and like feels like coming home. And just like after I graduated and coming back to Shanghai, I just realized this whole private language thing is gone because everyone can understand what I'm saying.
Mhm.
And it feels kind of weird. And like when I talk to my friends, sometimes I start like like speaking Chinese on my own as if nobody's listening, and then I realize, shit, everyone can understand what I'm saying, and I kind of lost that public language.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating to me, a lot of what you're saying about language, particularly as it relates back to English literature, what you said around people who are engaged with literature, are able to create these uh, preferred realities for themselves in their own worlds. And I'm curious for you because you transitioned from being a college counselor and into the alcohol industry, which some might think is like quite a big leap. You know, rewriting something, right, might not be the next logical leap, but I don't know, maybe in a sense it feels, you know, your own main character energy move into something different, even if it doesn't make sense on the surface level. I'm wondering if you can share what prompted that shift in you, and how did you bring your college counseling background into the current role that you have in managing a wine business?
So when I was doing college counseling, I loved that job. I did it for 2 years before I realized that I was losing the sense of fulfillment doing that job. Although I really enjoyed talking to my students and helping them write application essays, I realized 2 years gone into doing that, I really wanted to create something of my own and to call it a, a creation or a product that I make. So um, definitely, the first thing that I could think of was writing slash creating art, to be an artist or a writer, because that's something I learned in college. That's something I naturally do on the side, but I just lack that confidence to make it a whole career out of what I like. So, and I think I was still trying to figure out who I was, what stuff I want to write about, and even like what language I want to write in. So there was too much confusion, and I just wasn't ready to do that. So I definitely I thought about being an entrepreneur, and one choice was to intern at my friend's company, and I want to like learn how everything works, how to like different departments work together, because I had no experience in business at all. Um, but then I had lunch with a friend of mine who's like pretty successful at the time, and he told me, if you want to be an entrepreneur, just go and do it, because no entrepreneur has had the experience of like being an entrepreneur and succeeded. Like, you have to start somewhere. You have to start your own company. Maybe you'll fail, whatever, but you have to start. You're not going to learn from someone else. So I think there is some truth to that, and that's when I started thinking like I should just go ahead and do it. And so the wine business is a family business, but my dad only started doing it in 2018, but we've had the vineyard since 1997. So we just started to build a brand in 2018, and there was COVID and everything, so the whole thing was going very slowly. And my dad also didn't have a experience in building a brand or selling like products. So he was pretty lost, and his other business was like going through a pretty hard time because of COVID. So I was like, why don't I take over from here and make it something that's maybe more, suitable for the younger generation? And I want to build a brand that has my ideas in it. So that's when I started. And so far, it has the, I think, although it's a big leap, right, from college counseling to building a wine brand, but there are a lot of things I think are similar, because when I was doing college counseling, I was helping a student build an image that looks good for college admission. And when you build a wine brand, you're making products that cater to your consumers' needs and taste. So in a lot of sense, this is a common thread between the two. So I think a huge part of it was just understanding what your target customer wants to see or wants to have, and then finding a very effective way of communicating your product to the consumers. So in that sense, I think I'm kind of still doing the same thing, you know. Yeah.
There was once a time I felt like the brand is called Good girls get drunk. That's a
Yeah.
like very interesting name, and also fits for like you are running this for like you're targeting younger generations, right? So, what is the inspiration? What is the inspiration behind this, and how do you aim to shape perspective in the like alcohol industry?
Mhm. So Good Girls Get Drunk was the first product that I made since taking over the company. Um, because okay, Chateau Chanson is just like a name my dad thought of because it sounded French and maybe it would sell a good price. So it didn't really have that much like brand story to it. And I was like stuck with this terrible name for a long time because we're a Chinese winery, right? Like I was hoping the brand name would be a lot more Chinese, but I think my dad didn't own like this cultural confidence, like we are going to build a good Chinese wine brand. Um, so I was stuck with that, but I kind of I want that brand name to kind of fade away. So I want a new product that really shakes off the too classic and very French style. And I've always been a feminist, right? And I wanted to create something that I would own. So at the time I was thinking like, what is something I can secretly like slide in like the message that I believe in into a product. So and also at the same time it has to be visually pleasing, and the English can't be like too complicated for the Chinese consumers, so every single word is like easy to understand. So I made Good Girls Get Drunk, and there's like a in the parentheses that says sometimes, so it's Good Girls Get Drunk sometimes, so it's like a little bit of
Sometimes.
humor in it. And I made it following. There was this influencer called the Fat Jewish, and he made this wine called the White Girl Rosé, and I always thought it was really funny. So the packaging is kind of like I had inspiration from that wine packaging, and that's why I made Good Girls Get Drunk, and it's just to kind of advocate for girls who like to have fun, you know, can get loose sometimes, can get drunk, go out, go to bars, and have fun of their own without really thinking about anything else. And I just think that was a message I was trying to get through that. And luckily, I think a lot of, and also because I live in Shanghai, and I think cities like Shanghai have like more girls who would, respond to ideas and products like this. So I think it was pretty cool. So like when people like message me and say, "Oh, I saw your wine. It was really cool. I bought it for my friend." And I found that very satisfying.
It's so funny that you mention that inspiration around like girls having an opportunity to like let loose. So I used to co-own a bar in Beijing with a couple of my friends, and feminist as well here. And something that was really important to me was to have a ladies' night, but a ladies' night that was like for ladies. I'm sure you know that some of the ladies' nights are really
Yeah.
for the men.
Yeah.
And we called it ladylike because there was this idea that like, oh, to be ladylike is to not drink and to be very prim and proper. And so it was also a way to get at that fact that like, yeah, like I don't know. I also always hated the idea in the bar industry that there were girly drinks. And
I
I don't
know
know, all of that just like really pisses me off.
exactly.
So I love this idea, and I can't wait to tell my friends to go and buy Good Girls Get Drunk. I wish I could buy it for myself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I hated girly drinks because like I
Mm,
know more girls who can handle their drinks than guys. Like, why do like girly drinks have to be like a low alcohol content and like just have to look very girly or whatever? Just like, but at the same time, I have to, cater towards the market because it's the fact is right now at least I think girls, like most girls, are still prone to like a low alcohol level or like a smaller amount. So the bottle was like 500 milliliter instead of 750, so that one girl can finish the whole bottle on her own. I think that was something I was also thinking about in my design.
Where people can buy this?
Online 淘宝、小红书、抖
Just
音。
search for like good girls can get
Yeah,
drunk, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. I'm curious, you've talked a lot about how a lot of the work that you're doing is creating narratives and building stories. And, now it's behind products as opposed to behind people. And I'm wondering, as someone who's the storyteller for this brand, do you see connections between the narratives that you encountered in literature or even in art and the stories that you are telling through Chateau Chanson? How do those things sort of show up or manifest themselves, if at all?
Yeah, I think definitely, because I read mostly female writers' pieces. Um, I don't know why, but I was just drawn to a female voice and how they would write novels. Um, so I think definitely all the products that I make have a feminine tone or like a feminist message, kind of. Like even the other products are, I make it for the female drinkers among all my consumers, because I just think they are going to be the main consumers of wine and other alcohol beverages in the future. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of messages that can't really be included like so neatly in just like a wine or a series of wines. I think because a lot of complicated messages has like more space to really explain in detail. So I definitely think eventually I want to convey what I want to convey stuff in stuff I write instead of just like making products. But I think consumer products are like the easiest and most straightforward things that people are in touch with every day. um, so I think I'm just like creating stuff that people can easily understand. That's my first step. But I think later on, as I have more products, and maybe they will form like a more um, coherent and more complex storyline. And I would be able to convey more of what I want to say through the products that I make.
We talk a lot about like how the English literature and art shape your like view for the how you see the world, like how you choose your career, how you make the branding for the wine. So I also like wonder like how that influenced your view on the relationships. Because I know like people read a lot of novels, like especially like romantic novels, and you become unrealistic in relationships. And how do you
Yeah,
feel like you read a lot of novels and how that shape your relationships?
I know, because I talked to Victoria about relationships and stuff when you were not here last week. Um, and I don't know, it feels like another different episode, but I'm trying to be brief here. Because like I talked about, like the first novel that I like very seriously read was Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. And it was like after I finished the book when I realized it talked about a lesbian kind of relationship, and like how it talks a lot about sexuality, right? And being um, like a misfit in an environment. And also it talked about a very extreme kind of love where you want to be the destroyer and also be destroyed. And there was a line that says like, I I want to be destroyed. Like I wouldn't love. I'm gonna butcher this whole thing, but I wouldn't trust a man or like love a man so deeply because the man just want to be the destroyer and not be destroyed. And that book and like everything it conveyed, just like I think it was a start of me looking for like very extreme kind of love, like in very pure form of love in relationships. So I would keep testing um, the person I'm in a relationship with, and see if he actually loves me in a very like extreme way. I I just feel like people are not meant to be tested over and over again just to see how much this person loves you. And that's like a very toxic way, a very toxic relationship. But I just found myself um, like keep going into that toxic relationship cycle for a few years. Um, and just because I read so many novels and love stories and whatnot, I just always looked for like very romantic stuff in a relationship. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but it's just something. I'm not sure if it's my life affecting what I read or what I read affecting my life, but it's just something I realized. And I also talked to Victoria last time because I write journals, right? And I found a journal entry last year, and it says it's weird as fuck because I was kind of like dating a guy at the time, and I had this entry saying like I sometimes I wish I was gay because that would explain why I just feel so weird with every man I date. And very interestingly, I am dating a girl right now. We've been dating for half a year now. And just like I was talking to Victoria and saying like every guy I meet is like they they had an attraction for like they liked me first and showed interest to me, and then I got the signal and I was like, okay, maybe we can start dating. But with this girl, it was like I met her and she had a girlfriend at the time, but it was this instant attraction and I knew like I was like sexually attracted to this girl. And just like and at the time I wasn't really thinking about the journal entry last year, but I just like at the moment I just feel like everything made sense all of a sudden. um the whole relationship like with her, I didn't have to test anything. I just like found all the toxic stuff gone. um and I'm not sure if it's from like all the literature that I read that dealt with like um, people who feel othered, people who don't conform to like a typical gender norm or a sexuality norm. Um, like those were stuff I was interested all along in literature, and I just feel like my life kind of coming together with the literature that I read. Yeah, it's just something interesting. Yeah.
And you were sharing that's such a beautiful reflection and like convergence of
Yeah,
these
right.
worlds in a way that I feel like maybe I wouldn't have expected. I think particularly, I don't know, some of the things that you reminded me of initially reminded me of a quote. I don't know if you were familiar with Eartha Kitt. But there's this like pretty famous interview of Eartha Kitt. She was an actress and a writer and a feminist, and she spoke in this interview and she was asked by this man, like,
Mhm.
tell me about compromise in a relationship. Because she was pretty outspoken and pretty, you know, strong-headed and or headstrong rather. And then the man asked her, like, would you ever compromise for a man in a relationship? And she goes, me like compromise? She's like, for a man? She's like, why? She's like, why would I compromise for a man? She's like, I have all of these things. Like, if anything, the man should compromise for me. And I don't know, for whatever reason, that has really stuck out to me as
Mhm.
someone who is queer as well. I I am gay, and sometimes I wish that I weren't. Because I think of the similar issues that you have touched on or hit it at. I mean, it can be really disorienting, I think, sometimes to be uh attracted to a form of, I don't know, this
Mm,
masculinity that ends up being so steeped in so many issues, and then
mhm,
feeling like there's all that work you have to do to fix that person. I don't know. There's also this really funny comic, Leslie Lau. I have
mhm.
to share, I'll send it after this, but she talks about how
Take notes.
um if you told her when she was a little girl that she would grow up to like marry some guy named Greg who would wear like, I don't know, t-shirts
Oh,
and a backwards baseball cap. She would be like, if you told me when I was 7, she's like, I don't think I would wait for Greg, because she's like, I know Greg isn't worth it.
I saw that part. I saw that bit.
Okay, it's so funny. I
It's
just, I don't know. That's so, anyways, when you were talking, that's what I
exactly.
was
Yeah,
thinking
because when
of.
you're young, you're just like, why would I settle for a man like that? For a Greg. But then you just wish for like a normal guy, like who's
Right.
not a big psychopath, and that's okay.
Mm.
Um, yeah. And I think straight girls just like give up so much of themselves for guys who are not even worth it, you know?
Mm. It's interesting that you've shared all of this, because whether it's in relationships, in our careers, or just in life in general, right? Hindsight is 2020. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering, your journey is a mix of academia, right? It's this counseling, it's entrepreneurship, it's seeing how those things impact your own personal romantic relationships. I'm wondering, what lessons have you learned throughout this process that you wish you would have known perhaps at the start of your career?
Hmm. Um, Let me think. Career wise, I think something, because building this wine brand is like the first very serious entrepreneurial endeavor that I started on. And because I didn't know a thing about starting my own business and like um, doing branding, marketing, sales, something I wish I had known from the start was how important discipline is. Um, because like as students, we were always given assignments, told what to do, and like we had our days planned out. But when we started working, um, if like you were just like working in a company, you're still handed work that you have to do by a deadline. But then being an entrepreneur, it's a lot about you censoring yourself, you making plans on your own, and you're setting deadlines for yourself. So discipline becomes a very important thing. And a lot, like most people I know who succeeded in entrepreneurship, they had very strong discipline, and like they didn't need anyone else to tell them what to do or push them. They just had a very strong sense of urgency, and they can plan their days and months very clearly and set a very specific goal for them to reach. And I just thought that was something I really lacked, um, as like someone who learned literature and art. I was just like reading and like writing essays, but I didn't see anything in a very quantitative way. But then in business, you have to see everything in numbers. Like you have to like set like a KPI for yourself for this month, and if you can't reach that, how do you compensate for that next month? And just something I felt really uncomfortable with, but I had to, um, you know, try really hard to to work hard to you know make up for. Um, yeah, I think that's mostly like the lesson I've learned.
Think since both like all of us are really into readings, like we love read books and we love like no matter it's a biography or it's like novel or romantic novels. So I was like I really agree with this is like what reading can brings us is really we cannot experience everything. We cannot like we can finish a book, 1 or 2 books a month, but we cannot have like 1 to 2 relationships per month. That's crazy. But we can
Yeah.
see from like we can have the story, have the experiences from the book. And that's like I feel it's like very fascinating. So also I want to ask Andrea, also EJ. So like what do you find the most interesting from reading books?
Do you want to start?
Mm. I can start. Um, I think initially for me, books as a child, like started out as a form of escapism for me. I think that like growing up, there's a lot of like, I don't know, drama at home, let's say. My parents ended up getting divorced. And so I think books created this this alternate reality for me, a place where I could go, and it really was a safe haven for my imagination. I think because things at home were so rotten in a sense that like it necessitated my imagination that I had to go somewhere else. And so as a kid, and this is like of course like the 90s, there was no social media, or I didn't have a computer at the time, I didn't have the internet. So the only thing I really had were books at that time. I think as an adult, um, I'm someone who's the imagination piece is still there. I love getting lost in a book and being taken into another world. But for me, I really, at this place, I'm someone who loves language. I love words and the interplay of language. And I've studied many, many languages, and I still am studying languages now. I'm obsessed with Duolingo. And I don't do it necessarily for fluency, but I do it because I don't know, there's this indescribable feeling when like you read a sentence and you're like, wow. Like I think that's part of the reason why I love the college counseling piece and reading these essays, because like, I don't know, I had a student talk about the way the wind kisses the pond. I don't know, there's just something about wind kissing the pond that just does something to me. And so I love words and I love excess verbiage. And so I love being able to see how people's minds, especially because so much of writing is autobiographical, right? So even if it's fiction, even if it's sci-fi, it's still sort of steeped in that person's mind. And so I love to see how people articulate things with words.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And just like, I think it's very difficult to communicate that with people who don't share the same passion and love. And they're just reading words on paper, and like, it's like not that much of a deal. But like, we understand in our heart, like how much that, I think that's like a very intimate relationship when I read books and I feel like a strong sense of resonance with what I read. It's just like, I like have this feeling of like happiness when I read lines that I just like, I feel like very touched by. And just like, and like likewise, I love to learn like a bit of like other languages, like even Korean, Japanese, when I learn like little things about how they speak, and or like the ways they say the same word in a different language. And I just think it's very interesting because it's definitely related to their culture and their way of life. And I think language is just like a sneak peek into how they view the entire world. And in every culture is drastically different. And I just think there's no other way you can kind of like understand that on a very deep level of a culture through language. Like there are no other way you can do that other than language. And also for me, I think, I don't know, I think writing and reading is the only time I feel completely at ease with myself. Um, and whenever I just feel like very chaotic in my life, when I read something, I feel like I'm enriching myself, and I have become more full and more understanding of the entire world. And I just feel more control when I read, because like even I just spend like 5 to 10 minutes reading something like for a few pages, I just feel like I already learned something in that 5 to 10 minutes. And at the same time, I looked at a very big world, a bigger world that's like much more important and big than like the small stuff that I'm working on right now. Like I can read stuff that's from like hundreds of years ago, or like you said, sci-fi, which is a completely, you know, fake world, but it's so intricate. Just like I can immerse myself in stories and worlds and histories that are so much bigger than just me and my individual self, and that just provides so much comfort and satisfaction in my life. So yeah, I think that's why reading and writing is so important to me.
Yeah. So Andrea also writes like short stories, and she shared with me like there's a website. So it's all her stories. I love it. I love it.
Thanks.
Like those stories has like really touched me. It's like, yeah, I highly recommend EJ you want to write. It's in Chinese, but it's very good.
Okay.
But I write in very simple language, so I think if you like speak some Chinese, you will be able to understand as well.
I'll definitely check it out.
Chinese reading time.
Yeah, right now the only Chinese reading I do outside of WeChat is sometimes I'll watch Netflix and I'll put the subtitles in Mandarin so I can follow along. Passive learning, but I
Yeah.
watch a lot of Drag Race and Chinese subtitles. Our last question for you is just thinking about the future and what's next, right? How do you envision the intersection of your diverse experience shaping your future, both professionally and personally?
I think that's very hard because like I don't have a very clear plan for like my next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And I think because of COVID, it changed a lot of people's lives and perspectives on lives. So, you know, my original plan 3 years ago was to do a graduate degree in the UK, and I was already like writing application essays and whatnot. But after COVID, I just feel like I was like this far along in the wine business, and it's very hard for me to just like stop and go back to school. And also, it made me think like if I want to stay in Shanghai the entire time, like for the next few years, do I want to live here for like for the next few years? Because you know, Chinese people, they always think about like, do you want to buy a house here? Are you gonna get married here? Whatever. And I think that's like at least what my parents would plan for me, or like want me to plan in the same way that they're planning their life. But I'm just really not sure if Shanghai is the place I want to spend my whole life in. Um, and I think where I want to live is like the first thing I think of when I plan my future. So that's undecided. But I think one thing that's still the same for me is I want to convey what I believe in through stuff I create. So right now the medium is wine. It's the product that I make, but I think still in the future I hope to write and want more other people to read what I write. Um, and for me, the question is just like, do I write in English? Do I write in Chinese? Do I start out with a website? Do I do it on 公众号 or whatever? But it's definitely like what I know for sure is I want to keep creating stuff that I think are influential to a wider audience. Yeah.
As we wrap up, any parting thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our listeners? Or maybe you can recommend 1 to 2 of your favorite books.
Oh, that's so difficult. I would recommend writers. My favorite writers are Joan Didion, and it's very hard, and Michael Ondaatje, who wrote The English Patient. I love reading like anything that's by a female writer, African American writers, or like an immigrant writer. And I just feel like writers from a place of otherness, they write in a voice that's so unique and so intimate, and just like they see the world in the most detailed way, unlike anyone else. I think the advice I would give, um, I don't think I come from a place to give advice, but I really hope that more people would read stuff from um, these writers and to see the world in a different perspective. And that because I think that kind of reading experience humbled me a lot, and made me think of um, how the way we view the world was just, you know, it's not how everyone view the world. And to have more compassion and to have more imagination about the world we live in, we have to see things from other people's perspectives. And I think that's very important in building a better world, you know.
Thank you for sharing your like favorite writers with our listeners.
Mm.
And that concludes our conversation with incredible Andrea. It's been a journey from literature and art to guiding students on their academic paths and now curating experiences in the alcohol industry. Andrea, thank you for sharing your unique perspective and stories.
Yes, thank you, Andrea, for joining us on Cultural Collision. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode and want more insights from fascinating individuals, be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends and community. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep learning, and keep embracing the journey of life. Bye.
Bye.